Okay, so we are alive and we're seeing folks come on right now. So we'll take just a minute here as we get started. All right, and I've got a little bit of a moving target, so give me 1 second for those of you that I'm planning to move into the panelist position. Miguel, that includes you. We're still great. There we go. We'll give Frank actually, we're not going to give Frank a minute. We're going to get started. And then we've got a couple of folks who I know are going to be answering some questions and presenting. So with that said, I call this meeting to order at 7:05 p.m. Great, there's Tanya. Wonderful. She's gone mobile. Tanya, I was thinking tonight that I felt bad that we weren't all getting together in person, as I had been really wanting to do. And then the skies opened up, and I thought this is probably fortuitous that we are in safe, dry spaces.
Yeah, and you'd also promised to buy us a beer,
Well,
if
I'm
I
still going to
recall
do
correctly.
that. Yes,
And wine,
no.
wine for those of us who are not beer drinkers. That's red or white.
This is true. To the audience who couldn't see that chat, as soon as I offered to buy beer, there was a vote about the preferred cocktail. So anybody else who wants to join is welcome. All right, still calling the meeting together or to order at 7:05. We'll start with our roll call. Krishna Kumar,
Present.
Frank Chauvin,
Here.
Karen Gall is out this week. Ian Hawksworth has a work conflict. Howard Kurtzman,
Present.
David Martin,
Present.
Tanya Shand,
Present.
Matt Fay, I am here. And so we do have a quorum. We are going to continue our discussion tonight with the topic of the Neighborhood Management Authority Business Improvement District, generally kind of the concept of a place management entity for the Greater U Street Corridor and North Shaw neighborhoods. There was a meeting that was held at the Lincoln Theater today. Tremendous kudos to that team and to Gene Hamza, who coordinated the whole event. But to me at least, and I had to leave a few minutes early, to me at least, it really raised the focus on the day-to-day operating public safety coordination of services challenges that the Greater U Street corridor is really, I think, dealing with and struggling with. And so I think it's incredibly important that this group, very quickly advance its conversations and provide some very clear feedback to the council member and her team relative to the bill that has been submitted to council for consideration, and to continue our ongoing learning efforts about various place management entity frameworks, structures, benefits, and advantages. I'm going to.
Can I just jump in for one
Yes,
second?
please.
Back just on this question of this nightlife task force meeting. So the district had set up looking at three nightlife areas: H Street, the Golden Triangle area down on Connecticut Avenue, and us here on U Street. And I think I just wanted to emphasize that one thing that the Deputy Mayor of Public Safety really brought up at the end of the meeting, which Matt, I think you had already left, is that her primary interaction with these at these other places is through a bid it's through a bid where they have a regular partner they can be talking to. So that ties directly into why this is important that we're talking about this, that we need someone who can have these conversations literally every day, saying what's going on and talking to people like public safety. So it was highlighted at that meeting as something that was very critical to bring public safety into our corridor.
And I just want to jump in for 1 second, even though I know we don't really have control over this ultimately. But given the current political climate, the Congress, as it is currently, is waiting for any little thing in terms of public safety. They've already looked at the metro. I mean, you can see what's going on in the news. to try and begin to take over control of the district. And I think we need to keep that in mind when we're trying to figure out what we need to do. This is beyond now, I think, just yes, we have to do public safety, but we also have to be very mindful that if anything goes too awry, the Republicans are ready to swoop in and take over.
You know, Tanya, I will often tell my team when we're talking about performance that you have choices. So you can either manage, i.e., manage yourself, manage your project, manage your work. You can be managed, or you can be managed out. And
Exactly.
I think you are right that the district is under tremendous scrutiny. And this is a moment that I think all of us are wanting to rise to the occasion, right? Whether we are residents of the district, whether we are running and operating businesses in the district, whether we are elected officials at any level, including my own very low one, we're wanting to rise to the occasion. And I think that the conversation today and what Krishna highlighted is an example of how does a community enable itself, empower itself to rise to that occasion, and that's very much the conversation that we are about to have tonight as we take another step forward on these various options in front of us as we think about how it is that we put ourselves all in a position to be able to do this important work. I will just highlight a couple of basic logistics items. The first is that Karen Lee, who is absolutely tremendous and fantastic, who had the hand-raising flags in our last meeting, is not here today. So I am myself trying to do this. For better or for worse, we have fewer people. And so I think I will be able to stay on top of it. Krishna will be managing the Q&A. So as you go down to the bottom of the screen and you see the button that says Q&A, if you click on that, you'll be able to ask your questions. Krishna will be trying to answer anything that's a relatively kind of straightforward question or one that we may have already answered. And then he'll be asking folks if you've got a question that should be discussed in this larger forum to raise your hand. We'll promote you to panelist, give you a chance to ask the question, and we'll kind of go from there. And with that said, we'll dig in. You'll see a couple of folks who are not on the committee who are on the screen. Part of that is simply my bias for having more people around the table. But for those of you who don't know him, Miguel Trindade Duramo is one of our ANC commissioners, but also the chair of Commission 1B. David Meny, who is not on camera, and David, that's just fine, is returning to us from the council member's office. David was, and I'll mention this as we get into the document, heroic at our last meeting and sat for, I think, a grueling 70 minutes of questions. And so we are going to spare him the barrage of questions today and focus more on just confirming that we heard correctly the community feedback around the NMA. And then there are some questions that folks raised around the Business Improvement District that Mike Wagner, who's from Quadrangle Development and who has been working both with David, but also with business leaders in the community on exploring different avenues for Business Improvement District. We'll try to answer some of those questions as well. So that's the group of folks that you see here. There's David.
I just wanted to say, hey, I'm juggling dinner, but I will be available to answer questions if anything comes up.
You know what, David, as much as we know that you are superhuman, we also know you need to eat. So that's all good. And then I think out in the audience, I also see Howard Garrett, who is with is the 2G01 commissioner, which borders directly the area that's included in the proposed NMA. And I think we also have a member of Councilmember Pinto's office here. And I know that we'll be promoting her at some point very soon to talk a little bit about questions that have been raised there. So with that said, I am going to put up on the screen a presentation document that I'm hoping is going to make our, give me one second, our discussion a little bit more efficient. And I don't know exactly how I like to do this. There are so many options. There we go. Now I got to do this. Otherwise you can't see the whole thing. Sorry. All right, so I'm going to share. I just don't like my head floating in the middle of this. Um, and so, Krishna, I'm going to ask if you can see this okay. I can go into full screen mode as long as my head is not covering up things. Can you
You're
see?
good.
Okay, great. So let's do this. I'm going to presume a little bit. The other thing that I realized is that when I go on full screen, I can't necessarily see the hands. So I'm going to try to regularly hop off of this. But if there is another member of the panel, maybe Howard or Frank, if you guys don't mind just keeping an eye on the hands, that would be great, because I lose all of my dashboard elements. This meeting tonight is going to rely a little bit on kind of some prior knowledge. Right, we all had a chance to get together a month ago. It was in fact February 20th. We spent about 2 hours and 20 minutes together talking about the NMA framework. We also used that time to talk about frameworks for bids and what other bids in the community had done. What I'm going to do is just start really quickly with a refresher to get us all kind of caught up to the same place. And the other thing I found is that there's so much detail and a fair amount of complexity here that it's worth reviewing and revisiting some of these elements just to make sure that, what we thought we heard is in fact what we heard. That the things that I've been noodling on for the last 30 days are actually still the same things that I thought they were. But I do want to make sure that we're having an opportunity to pause, and I will do that as we go through kind of the major breaks in the slide presentation. I'm going to move through these relatively quickly. And so if you've got questions, I want you to raise your hand or put it in the Q&A. The other thing is that you will see on 2 different slides my ANC email address. And so if you are saying, gosh, this is new information and I would like to learn more, please email me. And I will definitely respond, and I will probably also put you in touch with David Meny, who can answer your questions as well. But I appreciate that there might be some folks who are joining us new. As a quick refresher, we're picking up essentially where we left off, talking about a place management entity for U Street Corridor and North Shaw. We're focused somewhat specifically on evaluating, because it's under a timeline, a bill which is called the Neighborhood Management Authority Act of 2025 that was submitted to the DC Council by Councilmember Nadeau in late January. And the bill seeks to create an entity that would manage the greater U Street Corridor and North Shaw neighborhood. The question has been raised by this group, why, right? Why would we create an entity? And you heard a little bit about that when Krishna started the discussion and referencing the nightlife meeting that happened today at the Lincoln Theater. I'm borrowing council members' words because I think they're accurate. I think they're good. Where she essentially said, look, in 2004, the city sought to create the small area plan, the Duke plan, that was going to create a vibrant and energetic and diverse neighborhood of arts and entertainment, but it's not been fully realized. That the 14th and U Street corridor, despite economic development, remains underinvested. That the public sector resources and services have not kept up with private development, and we're feeling a sense of safety concern and also a sense of disorder. And those are really very much the themes that were raised today by business owners who attended Gene Hamza's event at the Lincoln, and that the city representatives commented on. There is definitely a need for investment and for some structure on the U Street corridor, North Shaw. And this is the proposal that the council member has put forward. A bit of a refresher in terms of what we are trying to do here. And I don't think that we have lofty ambitions, but I do want to clarify what we're hoping to accomplish. The first is that we're trying to create a public forum for business leaders, community leaders, residents, business owners to participate in a process to learn more about, understand the bill, to ask questions about it, and to provide your feedback. We want through this process to then develop guidance from the community that will help to ensure that the bill meets the needs of the U Street corridor and North Shaw community. And then we also want to learn about other formats and structures that have been used successfully around the city as we all together learn more about what other neighborhoods and other communities like ours have done to solve some of the same problems that we're facing. We want to share that guidance with the council member. so that our community voice helps to shape and refine that legislation so that it meets our needs. And then we're also looking for your feedback in terms of what else we can be doing to help kind of communicate your priorities and objectives around place management, to leadership across the city. And I know that many of you have your own direct channels. So I certainly would never think that we would replace those. We're trying to create a forum here that we all can come together. And we will do it in person, and we will drink beer. Committee members, any kind of questions or comments, anything that you would add to this? Krishna, any questions that folks have raised at this point?
No, it's good.
So how are we doing this? 2 slides here. The first February meeting, we developed a summary of the bill text. The bill text summary sought to do 2 things. The first was to simplify dramatically the bill document that had been submitted to council, and it sought to use only the language in the bill. And so it was longer and more robust than what I'm going to share with you tonight, and it was substantially shorter than what the bill itself is. And the goal there was education, clarity, transparency. The question here is, did everybody get a copy? If you didn't, right, email me. One of the things that I am still learning is that I'm not necessarily able to email everybody who shows up to this meeting easily. So if you are attending and you didn't get a copy of that document, we didn't send it out, just send me an email, and I'll put together a mass email. You'll be blind copied, and that way everybody gets the document and you've got the information that you need. The second thing that we did is that we all together, the committee and the community, along with David, reviewed the significant portions of that summary at our February 20th meeting. And what we didn't go through, and the reason why I talked about significant portions, is that we didn't get a chance to spend as much time on the nitty-gritty of the services provided. And we didn't get to go as deep on the board structure as we may have wanted to. What came out of that February 20th meeting almost instantly was a question about how are we funding this? That how are we funding this then led to the discussion about, well, what's it going to do? And so I thought it was good in the sense that we had a bit of a free-form conversation that helped us and David probably get a better sense of what the real priorities were from the community. And we'll have a chance again to go back and make sure that we heard what you asked, and for you to be able to clarify anything that we misunderstood and to add anything that we may have missed. You all through that process asked really excellent questions. And in many cases, David, in his superhero mode, answered lots of those questions, which helped us, I think, all take another step forward in our understanding of what was on the table. There were a number of items that David said, look, we haven't gotten to that process, that part of the process yet, and we don't yet have answers for it. And we captured all of that information, and you'll see much of it reflected here today. You also asked a number of questions about business improvement district presentation. Mike and his colleague Michael shared their experience having set up and being involved in the operation of a couple of bids in the district. And there were some questions that we captured there and shared back with them as well, so that they could continue to educate us, and we all continued to learn more about place management. Tonight, we're gonna take kind of the background and the history. What did we cover? What did we learn? And we're gonna dig in a little bit further with the objective of revisiting the bill language, just to say, all right, are we all on the same page as we start? Again, if you didn't attend the last meeting, if you want to dig a little bit deeper, send me an email, the 1bo1@anc.dc.gov, and then I will reach out to you and be happy to either schedule a follow-up meeting for a group of folks that want to be part of a conversation, or reach out to you one-off. We're going to review the questions that were submitted by the committee members and the community with 3 goals. The first thing we want to do is to say, did we hear you right? Right? So of all the things that you said and all the things that were important, did we hear you right? The second is to say, is there anything else that you noodled on over the last month that you want to make sure that you are putting on the table so that we can transmit that? We're going to have a kind of a loose conversation around the relative prioritization of the questions, knowing that we can't necessarily cover everything, and so we want to make sure that we have an opportunity to be able to share the priority information with folks. and send this back to the council member and the council so that they are able to be able to ask ask their questions with community input, but also to be able to amend and modify the document. Brooke Pinto, who is a local celebrity in these parts, has raised her hand. I'm going to pause. I'm going to promote her to panelist so that she can join us on camera. There she is, local celebrity, not in the flesh, but kind of on the digital sense. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm sorry, I'm keeping my voice down a little bit because I'm at an event, but I just snuck to the next room because I wanted to join you all for a couple of minutes. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I don't want to get you all too off topic, but if it's all right, I'd love to just speak for 2 or 3 minutes about one of the things I'm working on for Shaw for a business improvement district. And I think in your contemplation of what will be helpful for the neighborhood, I just wanted you to have a sense of that vision as well. So what
That's great.
thank you so much. So what I would love to create in Shaw is a north-south business improvement district. I envision this going from about Howard University all the way down to Carnegie Library, where the Apple Store is. So it would include the convention, it would include 8th and O, it would include T Street and Shaw Library that many of you have worked on, and it would go probably from 7th through about 12th, east to west. Some of those boundary border conversations are still ongoing. One of the reasons I'm so excited to do this and explore this idea is when we were doing redistricting several years ago, it was most consistently brought to me around all the different neighborhoods in Shaw that folks really wanted to be reunified into one ward, into one neighborhood, so we didn't have so much bifurcation. And so we did that in 2022. And since then, I've been really committed to building a bid that I think will be really, really helpful for this neighborhood for a couple of reasons. One of which is around safety. Safety is still the biggest issue that I hear from neighbors in Shaw and in this whole kind of surrounding region. And part of Secure DC, my bill that passed last year with safety, created safe commercial corridor grants where bids could apply to these grants and get up to $500,000 to support safety efforts. And we have seen crime plummet as a result. So the downtown bid, for instance, applied for one of these grants and crime is down 87% in the downtown bid area. That is compared to crime being down 35% citywide. So that's just one intervention that a bid can help with, but having an entity that can apply for grants like this that are focused on safety are really important, especially for Shaw, I think, to supplement the work of the police department, to have additional eyes and ears on the ground, prevent some of the smash and grab break-ins and other challenges that we're having in the neighborhood with drug use and drug sales, and make sure that we don't have kind of pockets where there's just no eyes and ears on as we're trying to build safety. It's also going to be really important as we coordinate resources. This, as you know, is a tight budget year, and having these public-private partnerships, which are really what a bid is, help support some of the important functions with trash pickup, with applying to grants, as I mentioned, with prioritizing what parts of the budget really need investments. I would love to see more consistency with the materials that we use on sidewalks, for instance, in Shaw, so that it's very clear kind of where you're walking, that pedestrians can be safe. Those are things that we've been able to do with all of our other Ward 2 bids, downtown bid, DuPont Circle bid, Georgetown bid, that it provides a vehicle to collect budget investments and help disperse those to the neighborhood. So there are a lot of major benefits of having a bid. I'm really excited about it. I hope that we'll be able to work together on this. And I just wanted you all to have that information because I know there's a lot of conversations going on right now on how we can support the neighborhood. And that's one of the ways that I am thinking will be most useful is to have a Shaw bid.
Great. Well, I think what this group has been talking about, and you'll miss because I know you have to get back to an event, our Family Feud moment where survey says, here are the things we all agree on. But when we get to that, what we're going to talk about is that everyone thinks that we need more love on U Street and North Shaw. There needs to be coordination. There needs to be more resources invested. And then there are a lot of questions that this group has raised, as I would expect, very thoughtful about funding sources in the city as it's struggling with changes in funding availability. How do we do this? So I think it's great to always have options on the table, to be able to explore, compare, contrast. And so, really appreciate your coming and sharing your vision, because that area of 7th Street and up to North or South Georgia, really important part of this end of North Shaw. So this is great, and we appreciate your taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Just last thing I'll say really briefly is I also want to put in a plug for how important it is to maintain the Shaw Main Streets. And we have other areas that we have this model in DuPont Circle and Georgetown, where there's a Main Streets and a bid, and their work is extremely complementary. And they're very helpful partners for different functions. So I do think that's an important part. And I love what you said about the area needing some love. Maybe we can call this, we can think of a fun name for this mission that we can all work on together. But thank you so much again for having me. Good luck with the rest of your meeting. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. And the council members' mention of Shaw Main Streets reminded me that we typically have Alex Padro as one of our panelists. So Alex, please forgive the belated, oh, you're driving too. Be safe. And stay off camera if that makes sense.
I'm being driving, so I am safe.
All right, good. Well, that's very fancy. Good. Krishna, any other questions before we go back into our presentation? And I don't know if there are any questions immediately about what the council member said.
Well, there were two questions asking the councilwoman how she felt about the bill introduced by Councilwoman Nadeau, and essentially the same thing on the NMA on the NMA proposal. I think that maybe a little bit above us in terms of where we're trying to go with this, because that's real politics. But it would be interesting to get that answer. So I'm sorry she signed off so quickly.
Yep. No, I think those are good questions, and I know David Many is taking notes in between bites of dinner. So I imagine that there will be a connection and a conversation upcoming. Good. Let's do this. We'll dig back into the presentation as we try to keep things moving along. And there's always a little bit of a delay, so I apologize. Okay, so again, really what we want to do is we want to be able to share feedback. Part of what I think you're hearing from Councilmember Pinto as she joins us is that there's a lot of people thinking about the same issues that this group is thinking about in terms of how to keep an area vibrant and safe and engaged. And I know that residents and business owners can have different perspectives on what that means. And I also at the same time think that there is a lot of alignment as we think about what a vibrant community is. Let's turn quickly to the summary of the NMA bill. The proposed NMA boundaries we talked about last time, it's the same as the U Street performance parking zone. And so you see that highlighted here for anybody that has not either memorized the zone or torn down a sign in your local neighborhood that shows the performance parking zone in detail. But the thought was to align the geography of the NMA with one of its funding sources, which was the performance parking zone. The services, this is the shorthand version, clean and safe, support business and cultural destinations, maintain public spaces, manage public assets, which include the Howard Theater, the Lincoln Theater, and 625T, which is the triangle park in front of the Howard Theater, and to help coordinate DC government services. A lot of the questions that this group asked, we'll get to those in a moment, were around, well, specifically what services and where will you provide them and to what extent? Funding was the big topic, but there are a couple of, I think, important clarifications that we got. The bill as it is written today proposes no new taxes and would be funded by redirecting existing revenues from the city. That would include direct appropriations from the district, the parking meter revenues within the performance parking zone, revenues from other kind of real estate sources, including the deed and recordation transfer that it's collected on kind of specific parcels and developments, grants, fees, donations, and then proceeds, from any kind of settlements or sources from the city. One of the questions that did come up that I know was a very hot topic was the question of alcohol tax. There was some confusion because the proposed neighborhood management authority for Columbia Heights does contemplate an alcohol tax. The U Street NMA does not. And so I think that was an important clarification. We didn't get a chance to cover the board structure, but in short, this kind of helps, I think, kind of make it very, very simple. The board structure that's being proposed is 10 voting members. There would be 4 appointed by the mayor, 4 appointed by the council, 1 appointed by the ANC. The mayor would appoint 2 business owners, Representative Howard University and a performance venue. The council would also appoint an owner or operator of a performance venue, an individual that's got business finance or economic development expertise, someone representing a business or commercial property, and then another resident. And then the ANC would appoint a resident. There were questions that came up about the composition of the board. I think the more important questions were about accountability. But this is essentially the structure of the board and the folks that would be participating on it. And then there would be a number of city agency representatives who would serve in an ex officio capacity as liaisons between the NMA and the city. From an accountability perspective, we talked briefly about this. The way that the board is held, the way that the NMA is held accountable is through that board and the appointment of those individuals. The annual budget must be approved by the mayor. The finances are audited annually, and the results are shared with the mayor and the council. And there would be an annual public hearing that the community and business and residents could ask questions about. And then, as written today, although I know that David is continuing to work on this, the relationship between the NMA and the bid is such that it's kind of an either or. And I know that conversations are ongoing to kind of explore how those could work. And with Councilmember Pinto's comments about a portion of this area potentially being considered for a bid, that kind of raises the question of kind of the relationship. Let me pause there. Again, I'm going to stop sharing for just a minute. How do I stop sharing? There it is. I'm going to stop sharing and see if there are questions, comments. Karen Gall, welcome. If there are questions, comments, clarifications that the committee members want to make to that very brief summary, and then also see if there are any hands in the audience of folks that want to either ask kind of a specific question to clarify before we go into the question segment, or if there's something that I said that just doesn't seem consistent with what we talked about in our February 20th meeting.
Matt, this is Tanya. I'm driving, so I can't put my hands up. But I did want to get a clarification. How does Pinto's comments, is that related to the gentleman that spoke last time about a bid, or is this 2 separate things? Or remember there were like a group of people that were talking about bids at the last meeting. Are they working on the same thing, or is it just? Yep.
So let me say this, right? I'll give you my honest answer, and then I'll give you my dangerous answer. So the honest answer is I don't know how they relate, because the council members' comments tonight were the first that I've heard about the Shaw bid structure that she referenced. My dangerous answer is kind of what I had said a few minutes ago, which is there's lots of people in this part of our community who are really looking at what they think should be a more vibrant, safer, more successful community. And so there are lots of people who are putting a lot of thoughtfulness into this. And so Councilmember Nadeau put a lot of thoughtfulness into drafting an NMA proposal. The folks at Quadrangle and people that they're working are putting a lot of thoughtfulness into a bid concept. It turns out that Councilmember Pinto's office is putting a lot of thoughtfulness into a different bid structure, or I'm going to say another, form of a bid structure. So I think that what this is reflecting is that and then you've got Alex Padro, right, who's on the screen, who's putting a lot of thoughtfulness into how the Shaw Main Streets provide services and support along this area. So it's one of those situations where, to some extent, we should almost feel lucky that so many people are fighting over us. But if I think back to the high school prom and you say, great, everyone's interested, but I still need somebody to dance with. The important thing is that through all this interest, we want to make sure that we've got a solution that is in fact going to advance and going to have an impact. Because as we have had, sidebar conversations, and many of you may have had sidebar conversations, not ending up with a solution at all probably isn't the place that we want to be. And so right now we're kind of spoiled a little bit for attention. And our goal here is not to choose one over the other. Our goal is to say, let's give feedback on what we need. Let's give feedback on what's important. Let's give feedback on the things that are priority to us. And I think that will create a constructive dialogue. Krishna, I see your hand up.
Yes. So just as a point of procedure here, I have a lot of questions from the audience, but do you want to go through the committee questions first, and then I can sort of raise any audience questions that are in the Q&A?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Do we have any other committee questions? Okay, they can always raise their hand, Krishna,
Yes.
as we go forward. Oh, good. Hey, Karen.
Good evening. I was gonna be out because I still have my coat, but I certainly was flagged to come in. So good evening, everyone. Um, Matt, the question that I have is basically we have a lot of people who are proposing things, and one of the things that we tried to highlight during our last session with the ANC is to make sure that when people come to the table, that they're coming to the table with a perspective that gives us their track record, their history of who they are, who recommends them, and also how have their performance has been in the past in these type of venues or settings, etc. So when we're doing these considerations, I think it's very important that we have a criteria on how we're looking at anyone who brings forward any particular ideas to the table as to their proposal on how they want to engage with the community, because we have seen a series of people who, or companies, developers slash whatever, who has not really presented well as great actors in the community or consistency in regards to their performances of service. So I just want to make sure that we're utilizing that as we are valuing the opinions and the input from people who are, as you mentioned, all these new dance partners. You definitely have to vet them. So I really want to see that we're using that criteria to make sure that we are working well with our community. Thank you.
Yep, good points. And I think we do need to make sure we're working well with the community. So thank you for that. Questions from the audience. Krishna, do you want to start us down the path?
Yeah, so we have a couple questions from the audience. First, and this was already dismissed. You won't see it in the Q&A, but I thought it was a good one. From Daryl Drumming. I had mentioned in the opening about one of the advantages of a bid NMA is having regular talks in public safety. And his question was, isn't that already happening with Main Streets? So I thought that was a pretty good question. And I thought maybe, Alex, you could jump in there and sort of talk about what you guys do there, and what would you see the difference between the conversations you're having and like what a bid NMA would be having? Not to put you on the spot.
If you can give me a minute, I have just arrived and I will get to my
Yeah.
desk so we can answer your question.
Let's do
Okay.
this, Alex. Let's come back to you, and Krishna, let's go to the next, and then we'll circle back.
Right. And then next question from Leah Cheston. Can we talk about the timing of the NMAs if they were implemented? I'm guessing it misses budgets for 2026. We're talking about 2027 at the earliest.
David, is that something that you are able to take, or is that that's a big question, right? I mean, because there's so many moving pieces. So if you were to say that's something I need to dig into and to get back to this group on, I think that would be a very fair answer.
Yeah, I think that'll be a very pertinent question to ask in a little over a week's time, once council has the budget. But I can say that it is Councilmember Nadeau's very high priority goal to allocate funding towards this particular mission in the current budget year that we're about to consider.
Yeah. Let me do this really quick. Thank you, David, for that. Let me do this really quickly, Alex, before you speak. For us to be productive, right? For this group to be productive, and there's a lot of folks that are on this call, so I want to respect your time, and I want to use it well, and I want to add value. For us to be productive, we need to be focused. And so we've got a couple of tasks ahead of us, right? One of the tasks is to give some targeted feedback to the Councilmember Nadeau, on the bill that she has proposed. And I think we're making good progress on that. One of the things that the community asked was, as we began to talk about place management, was to learn more about the bid. And we're trying to do that in a targeted way where we're coming away smarter about, how these different entities work. I do want to give Alex an opportunity to talk a little bit about Main Streets. I know that Mike Wagner and his team talked a little bit about the difference between things that bids can do and things that Main Streets can do. And one of the things that I heard from Councilmember Pinto was the desire for a collaboration between Main Street and bid. So it seems like those are things that can amplify one another. I want to be careful that we don't spread our attention so thin that we are kind of playing around with lots of concepts and we don't get one done. Otherwise, we're doing a lot of flirting and we're not getting a dance partner. And so I want to make sure that we don't kind of get too far off track. So Alex, I'm going to ask you to keep yours kind of short. The other thing that I want to say, and I want to be clear that I'm not saying this in any way in a critical way, but I just want to say, we knew that Councilmember Pinto's office was going to join tonight to kind of listen to the discussion and to ask some questions. I was not aware. It's certainly not unwelcome because it is nice to know that there's a lot of thinking going on, and I like this group to be aware. But I was not aware that she was going to share a proposal, and I don't want that to sidetrack us. And so I want to continue to make sure that we're, giving feedback on the NMA, learning about the bid structures, and we'll make sure that we give kind of due time to different options that get put on the table. But I want to clarify to the group that's not something we had officially built into the agenda, and so we're going to continue to make sure that we push forward and stay focused on that as well. But I don't want it to take us off track for tonight. Alex, go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. So you do have multiple main streets that currently serve different parts of the greater U Street community. In addition to Shaw Main Streets, you also have U Street Main Streets, and depending on how the NMA is configured in terms of its service boundaries, 14th Logan Circle Main Streets also could have a portion of that territory as well. As Councilmember Pinto mentioned, we do have a track record here in the city of having Main Streets work collaboratively with bids, successfully. I've spent some time with the executive directors of the DuPont and the Georgetown Main Streets. Those are the two Main Streets that have been working with bids, the longest in the city, and gotten some very good input and recommendations about how those two entities can collaborate. as I think I mentioned at our last meeting, one of the concerns that I do have is that we do uh, uh, have the possibility of overlapping interests and responsibilities and competition for resources. The NMA is proposed as an entity to solve a lot of problems and deal with a lot of issues that bids and main streets are already able to undertake. So to add yet another bureaucracy and another structure could potentially not give us more, but give us less. So I do want folks to have that in mind as well. But in terms of how Main Streets, work with the community, Main Street organizations are community driven. Generally, there is only one full-time employee or one employee, full-time employee and a part-time assistant. Everybody else is a volunteer, whether they're a business owner, whether they're a resident, or another interested stakeholder, property owners, etc. Everybody works together, and ideally, we work towards common goals, setting goals, creating a vision, for the neighborhood, and then using all of the resources available to help to create that vision and make it a reality. And where there are disagreements, put them in the parking lot, and then come back to those at a later date. Folks that remember the 14th and U Street, Main Street, that existed once upon a time will remember that they imploded because they couldn't agree on enough mission critical issues so that they could actually make progress. But what I've been, told by the folks that are currently in, relationships with Main Streets and bids is that if you have clearly defined objectives and responsibilities, and that everybody is working transparently and working together, that can be an ideal combination of resources. Currently, Main Streets don't have sufficient funding to be able to do everything that the community would like to see us do. For example, in Clean and Safe, the Shaw Main Streets Clean team only works full time 3 days, has part time on the other 4 days because of the limited resources that are available. A bid would have at minimum $1 million to work with as a budget. Last thing that I would like to also mention is that it's really unknown what the revenue generation is going to be for the performance parking pilot. There was a pilot on in the ballpark area several years ago, and apparently that the revenue generation was less than stellar. And so far, DDOT doesn't have any numbers to share, and doesn't even choose to propose any estimates of what it could generate.
Let's
So
do this, Alex. I'm going to cut you off there, in part because I think we're going a little bit further afield than we want to, ball field maybe than we want to. I'm also looking at the time at 7:50, which is, I was hoping we'd be done around 8:15. Part of what I'm hearing, I'm going to do this. First thing I'm going to ask is that if folks on this call can send me an email. What I'm going to do is send out documents to you. All of you have showed up so that you can participate and to make sure that you're kind of part of these conversations. I want to make sure that you're getting the information and the material so that you can kind of play with it and also be able to provide some feedback to it. So send me your email. I will email you the documents. You can email me additional comments. Krishna, I'm going to go to you if you individually have a question. Otherwise, what I want to do is very quickly review the questions, and then I'm seeing a number of comments with folks saying we'd like to hear the questions answered from the bid, because the bid didn't get as much time last time. We were really focused on the NMA, and so there's a handful of folks who were saying, hey, I'd really like to hear more about the bid structure, and maybe Councilmember Pinto's comments triggered more interest in that. But let me just, any other major questions, Krishna? Otherwise, I'm going to go back to this document and try to move through it quickly.
No, I mean, there were, as you said, there's a couple of questions on Q&A on that, and you can maybe bring those up when you want from Paul.
Yep.
I think they're all good, and but you determine what that's why I had my hand up.
Yep, bear with me, right? So folks, ask your questions, raise your hands. I'm going to go through probably 4 or 5 slides really quickly, and then we're going to come back and do a discussion. First, this is my Family Feud, right? So Survey says, what did we all agree on? What I heard, what the committee heard last time is that the U Street North Shaw needs some love. And there's a lot that we all love about this area, and there is more love that it needs. Secondly, the district services specifically related to trash collection, cleanliness, safety are not keeping up with the needs for those services. The area would benefit from a broader mix of businesses with a focus on art venues consistent with the arts overlay and the Duke Small Area District vision. And so one of the big questions that had come up for folks about services is how would any one of these entities be able to create a greater and more diverse mix of businesses? The residential communities need services too. So one of the things that is potentially unique about U Street and North Shaw is that you've got a relatively narrow, very, very concentrated business corridor. And then you've got residential areas on either side of that, running north and south. And so a lot of the trash, a lot of the safety issues spill off of that corridor into the residential areas. And so residents said, this is something that we need as well. And then finally, and this was absolutely brought to light today, although this was written before that meeting, there is a need for some kind of coordination because when the question is asked, how do we solve this? Right now, there's really no one who's sitting there with the Main Street, sorry, not Main Street, Alex, with the U Street view to say across all these different services, what is it we can do and how can we coordinate a response? So the questions that came out from a purpose perspective, and I tried to organize the questions that we all raised together along the same framework that I followed for the NMA. There were actually a lot of questions relative to the purpose. So what's the purpose of an NMA? Why do we need to establish one on EU Street? I think there are some good answers to that, but there's certainly kind of, I think, more discussion that can be had. Another question that was asked, why can't city agencies that are already paid tax dollars provide these services? My guess is that David and Michael could answer that question from both the NMA perspective and the bid perspective. When you think about the concentration of activities in these areas, will the NMA be able to improve the mix of businesses? And then one question was, what are the advantages of an NMA versus a bid versus a Main Street program? So people very much aware of the different options and asking the questions. From a geography perspective, the questions that came out were around kind of why this geography. And David talked a lot about aligning it with performance parking, which I think was helpful. Questions about, could it change under what circumstances? Who would approve that? And then there were questions about, have we had conversations with people outside of Ward 1 about this proposal, given that it currently extends, south into Ward 2? The services question, we're really around, we want to get more specific. So what specifically would be done? Would they be provided equally in business areas and residential areas? How would they be different than the services that are provided today? And then also, what net new services would be added and how would they be funded, which gets into the funding question in just a moment. And then, how does the NMA propose to coordinate with DC agencies? What's the future role of Main Streets, which again came up today? And then how will the entity promote the area? Most of our questions really centered around funding, projected costs, looking at kind of multi-year projections, questions about how stable those revenue sources are. Lots and lots of questions about performance parking, whether we would be able to get the revenues for the parking tickets in addition to the parking. Questions about that performance parking. I know that David is working to get that information, and we're looking forward to sharing it with all of you. And then questions about the Howard and the Lincoln theaters. The board structure was funny in the sense that it was like, why only 2 seats for the business? Why only 2 seats for the residents? And I think what it's really raising is this question of transparency. Who's really, if we're going to put a lot of agency in this agency, how do we know that it's looking out for us and that we're able to hold it accountable? And I think from an accountability perspective, the big item here was around kind of how long does the NMA last, and does it make sense to have it sunset and renew in the 5-year cycle that a bid does, so that there's kind of a constant focus on producing and delivering results. The question that was already raised, and again, we're raising here again, is how long is it going to take So when does it get established? When could we expect to see services? And I think David did a nice job of saying, look, this is something that we're working through. It's a high priority and there's a lot of moving pieces. We also asked a lot of questions about the bid. And so they were organized almost exactly the same as the NMA discussion. So, what services would be provided? How would it be funded? The funding is in fact different because there is a new an additional tax. It's a property tax on the buildings that is used to fund. And then how much would it take to set up this bid? And so I'm going to kind of do two things here. The first is I'm going to pause and see if there are comments on the questions that I just went through. Any glaring omissions, any misstatements, anything that folks are saying, hey, I really want to do look at this. Karen Gall told me that my head was blocking the answers. I'm sorry, Karen. I was worried about that. I don't love that format, so thank you for saying it. And that's one of the reasons I'd like to get people's emails so that we can just send this document around and people can kind of process it and digest it. But quickly, any kind of questions on what I ran through, and then what I'm going to ask is for Mike Wagner from Quadrangle to talk a little bit about the questions that we raised about a bid. Have a little bit more time to dig into that. It's 8 o'clock on the dot. What I'm going to do is try to kind of allocate the next, let's say, 20 minutes or so to this. We've got 33, 34 people on the line, which is good number. I think we can probably hold on to that number for the next 20 to 25 minutes. And so, Mike, want to make sure that you've got a chance to, kind of talk to folks about the questions that they raised. I know I'd shared them with you previously, so you've spent some time working on them. And then, Krishna, again, if you can continue to manage the Q&A and make sure that we're promoting folks who've got questions so that Mike can answer those live too.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone this evening and for everyone for donating their time this evening to talk about these issues. I can tell from the comments today and in other forums, obviously there's certainly a great amount of concern about the community and its direction, but certainly also a lot of very dedicated people looking for the right solution to improve things. So thank you, Matt, for providing some of these questions to me in advance. I'm going to work here to be very efficient in terms of answering them. So we allow some time for questions and for people to enjoy the rest of their evening. So the first question was, what services would a U Street bid provide to the community? And I would generally put this into 4 or 5 buckets. First is place management, working in conjunction with individual property owners and businesses, as well as the public agencies, contribute to the services of security and maintenance, in the neighborhood. This includes things like sidewalk cleaning, trash collection, investing in security cameras and coordinating with MPD, signage and other things of that nature. It would also contribute to place enhancement. It's just some things as small as planting tree boxes and planting and landscape improvements, streetscape improvements, public art, wayfinding, perhaps assistance with storefront facade improvements and activating public spaces. It would also play a role in place marketing, communications, and branding. It also would engage in performance monitoring to make sure that the investments that it's making are being successful. I would also add that while a bid does not lobby under the strict definition of lobbying, it is an advocate for the neighborhood and can serve as a focal point or kind of a fulcrum for communicating issues between the business and property owners and the various city agencies and politicians, kind of executing the plans for the neighborhood. I think it was an interesting point. I had a conversation with Commander Pulliam of the 3rd District, talking about some things that MPD had been trying, and they, I guess, confused or angered or upset some business owners because I guess it hadn't been communicated, and he was like, well, I've got 60 or 70 folks I need to communicate with, and that's pretty difficult. This is a role that a director of a place-making entity can handle in terms of being that conduit of communication to make sure that everyone is on the same page about things that we're trying, things that we're doing in the neighborhood. So that's a very high-level look at what services the U Street bid would provide the community. There's a few sub-questions here that I'll try to hit quickly. One was to provide some examples of success stories from other bids. I think we heard some of these at the last meeting. And actually, here, let me pause there real quickly, because I know there was a comment earlier about who is coming to the community, who's speaking, and kind of what is their connection. So again, my name is Mike Wagner. I'm with Quadrangle Development. I'm a 20-year district resident. I've been working in real estate development and asset management for 20 years, 10 years at Quadrangle, specifically focused on the DC market. We're investing, we have several co-investments with Howard University. We just delivered the Langston Apartments at 7th and T across from the Shaw Metro. We have a couple other projects in planning up Georgia Avenue across from Howard. I'm also and then Matt has my contact information, and you're certainly welcome to share that with anyone, and anyone's welcome to reach out to me at any time kind of after this meeting if you have follow-up questions. All right, so back to your questions. Some success stories, and we did talk about this a little bit on the last meeting. These range from the very large, from the small but meaningful, to just kind of the recurring ways bids can help improve quality of life. The example of a very large one would be like the downtown bid managing Franklin Park and the investment that the city has made in that. Now, the downtown bid is enormous. It's $14-15 million in revenue, and what we're talking about here is going to be much smaller, more in the range of like a Friendship Heights or a DuPont bid. But they're all small things. I think one of somebody on the call last time pointed out, like the Adirondack chairs in DuPont Circle. That's a small thing that can be done that improves public spaces. It provides a gathering place, and it can be nimble and quick. It's something that just can be done without a lot of bureaucracy. So you can be very responsive. You can try things. If they fail, you can try different things. And I think you think about some of the recurring things that you see, in DC, like there's the clean teams. And I do want to emphasize the absolute importance of coordinating with existing Main Street entities to make sure that you're not duplicating services, to make sure that you are maximizing all sources of revenue and providing the coverage that you need and not kind of missing things, duplicating efforts, fighting over responsibility. There absolutely needs to be coordination and communication between those existing entities. But yeah, thinking of things like clean teams, farmers markets, examples of, connecting prospective retail tenants with landlords. There's just, communicating, like setting up security cameras and getting them linked up to MPD's system. There's just a lot of things that they can do, both big and small, to make a difference. And so the next question is, what kind of staffing would you envision to provide these services? And we have had the opportunity to update our economic analysis. We have run north, south, and east, west models. It is a central tension here, and we certainly appreciate the support from any and all council members to try and get something done here. So initially, what we're looking at with our budget would be 2, perhaps 3 full-time staff members to start out. You're looking at an executive director and a program manager. And depending on how you allocate the money, you may be adding some administrative support staff. So 2 to 3 full-time employees. But that's not really the full benefit because you're going to have some contracted services here. And what we believe is you could use contracted services to contribute up to 9 full-time equivalent staff members, about 18,000 annual hours. That's the thing. I mean, the biggest example of this would be clean teams, but there are certainly other things as well. In terms of the budget, we know that we can support an annual budget of around 1.2 million based on assessment rates within the existing boundary maps. I think that holds true for a couple of the different orientations. And that's just the starting point. That's where we are right now. That number can certainly go up as additional projects come online and assessed values go up. And I'm not just talking about your tax rate or your property value goes up. This is about, there's a lot of land held for development in Shaw right now. While the capital markets aren't cooperating, there's going to be significant new development coming online over the next 3 to 5 years. And then would those services be provided only to business or residences? Services are provided within the bid boundary, which includes both businesses and residents, typically multifamily, like the multifamily, if you think about it as residential. But then certainly benefits accrue to people outside of the bid boundaries, just for the improvement in safety, security, cleanliness, quality of life in that business improvement district, because you're trying to make sure some of those negative externalities from commercial corridors do not spill into kind of the historic residential communities that surround this boundary map, even if they're not directly covered in the boundary itself. All right, the next question is, how would the bid be funded? This is an important question. saying what is the typical tax rate for a DC bid. DC has about a dozen bids, as we learned last month's call. Commercial building tax rates typically range from 9 cents to 19 cents per $100 of assessed value. Residential tax rates range from $120 to $130 per unit. And hotel tax rates range from 95 to 120 per unit. If we're talking about a U Street map, there aren't any hotels, so that's a little bit irrelevant at the moment. Who would be subject to the bid tax? Property owners within the bid boundary are subject to the tax rates. Nonprofit and governmental entities are exempt, just broadly speaking. What impact would business owners feel of the bid tax? Well, property owners would be paying the assessment. It's issued by OTR along with your property taxes, and so the payments are due in 2 installments in March and September. For the commercial tenants on this call leasing space, that would depend on the contractual lease language with your landlord in terms of how operating expenses are passed through under your lease. Would single-family residences be subject to the bid tax? The bid boundary map is focused on commercial corridors. I'd have to check in with some of our consultants if that does pick up any kind of single occupant row houses. But ultimately, it depends on the legislation as it gets drafted, which is not a step that's been taken yet. For example, in the Capitol Riverfront bid, a residential property with under 10 units would be exempt. You know, the way the bid funds itself is from big institutional projects. You know, if you have a row house that's, you know, a single unit, you know, that's not really going to drive things here. Right now, the assumption is all $1.2 million that we're thinking about, trying to be conservative, would be funded by the bid tax. Certainly after a bid is established, many go establish a foundation, a nonprofit entity that can accept grant funding from other organizations. We're certainly not banking on that, but it would certainly be a huge focus of the year one to go out and kind of seek some of those opportunities. And I know Michael McCarthy, my colleague who sends his best regards, but was unable to join us this evening, has already started laying the groundwork with certain things. And of course, Councilmember Pinto, who joined earlier, you know, talked about things like the Safe Corridors grants, which are available. And then, so yeah, like if you would have through grants and safe corridors, those are the other types of fundings that would be available. Why don't I pause there? I don't know if I see some Q&A or some chat, so I just want to take a pause there here to make sure that I've touched on the questions that were important to those on the call this evening.
I'm going to go a little bit out of order, and Amanda, apologies, I'm going to get to your question second, but one question was asking about managing with the, oh, sorry, that's actually about the NMA. So we'll go to Amanda's question. And the question was around bid governance. And so the question again is around accountability. It might make sense, Mike, to distinguish a little bit between what a bid usually covers versus what the NMA is covering, kind of business versus residential. But Amanda's question is accountability. So how will businesses hold a bid accountable? How would residents hold a bid accountable?
Sure. Typically, a bid will be run by an executive committee. It's certainly it's something that's defined in the legislation that can be as big or small as the bid would want. Typically, you keep them a bit smaller for the executive committee, you know, something like 5 or 7 people, and then there is probably a larger board that's involved. Members of the Shaw bid would include non-exempt property owners and commercial tenants. The bid holds annual meetings among members to elect a board of directors and adopt the annual budget and business plan. And I think we've also talked about it last time that bids are certified for 5 years and do have to apply for recertification. So you absolutely have to prove that you're getting the value for the taxes that you're collecting and spending, that you do not exist in perpetuity as a bid.
Okay. Let's go to the hands. Krishna, yours was first, and then Frank.
Yeah, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess I'll just going back, and I'm a little confused here because I mean, and again, none of us were expecting to hear from the councilwoman Pinto today, but it really sounded like her interest is on a north-south bid, and you know, we had talked about that a little bit, like at the last meeting, and I know that you kind of looking at other projections and other numbers, but I guess I'm still concerned about, what really is the investment you guys want to make on the rest of the U Street corridor. And I just want to try to pin you down here on that because not trying to get to your commitment level here, but it's also that the U Street corridor, really when we're talking about this is a couple blocks up and down from U Street, which I don't think any of your bid proposals really are going to include. I mean, I think any of your bid proposals are going to be pretty narrowly targeting U Street and sort of the commercial buildings on that and not on the row houses and multifamily on either side. And so that's just a huge concern I have because that really comes back down to the core issue that we have in this area, which is the disconnect between our commercial corridor and the residential corridor. And how have you thought about that? I mean, you addressed it a little bit, saying, you understand that you need to be doing things to keep the historic communities on either side. But I just wanted to push you a little further on that and see where your thinking is. I mean, I know it's awkward, and I'm not trying to
No, certainly
sabotage you or
understand.
not, but I'm just trying to get your thinking.
No, it's a good question. So first of all, I mean, it's from a standpoint of pursuing the commercial corridor, first and foremost, it's a practical consideration for getting a bid through the approval process. I'm sure most folks are aware, but if you're not, to get your bid approved, you go through a petition process where you are securing the approval and sign off of 50% of the assessed value within the boundary and 25% of the property owners. From a standpoint of adding, and this is just practically speaking, I know this doesn't address your concerns, but I want to talk to you at least about the thought process that leads to this, is that when you add the row house neighborhoods, you're not adding a ton of assessed value and you're adding a lot of sign off. And I think, so that is first and foremost the issue of why that happens.
Let me just pin you down on that for a second, because what you mean by that, if I can understand you, is saying, so we have, like, say, a multifamily building on U Street, right? And that's to get the sign off, you just need that one owner to sign off on that versus, and that building's probably worth $40-50 million because it's a 200 unit apartment building. And then if you tried to go to a
probably more
townhouse,
like 500, 400, 500,000. Yeah, no, they get pretty big in terms of assessed value. So sure.
right. And then you go and you try to get the townhouses that might be 300 feet away, and there's 40 townhouses, but the assessed value of those, even if they're $1 million a piece, is only $40 million. Is that what you're trying to say?
That is the tension between assessed value and number of ownership.
Okay. Okay.
And and again, so I would also, so that's certainly a tension in terms of seeking approval. But from my perspective, the negative externalities are generated in the commercial corridors and then kind of bleed into the residential neighborhoods. So if you can better control the commercial corridors, that certainly will contribute off that commercial corridor in terms of things like trash, the people who are hanging around with no good purpose, who don't necessarily live in the neighborhood. I mean, I think, I live a few blocks off of H Street myself, northeast. So I mean, I certainly understand the perspective of the residential homeowners off of U Street and 7th and 9th Street, things like that.
If you look at the DuPont bid map, I think it's actually very telling about the strategy, because it really kind of follows the density around the circle, kind of, cutting in and out like a jigsaw puzzle, to capture kind of the high density, high activity areas. And then I think to Mike's point, now what you've got is a lot of solution on the high density areas, which is then benefiting the lower density. That's just kind of one concentric circle out.
Yeah, and then these are additional services being provided on top of what the city normally provides. So through good coordination, hopefully, your one thing you can do is by providing those services on the commercial corridor, the city maybe has more attention or capacity for the residential corridors. I think the other thing too is that Shaw is, well, despite the significant investment over the last several years, and was a central tension in kind of the failed prior efforts a number of years ago, is that it's a low density, for all intents and purposes, neighborhood. It's not the downtown. And as such, the revenue potential in terms of the amount of money you can raise and the critical mass of services you can provide there's a balance in terms of making sure that you're not spreading yourself too thin, such that you're actually getting success with the services that you do provide. So I think, we're trying to balance those things in terms of establishing this entity.
Great. Frank, I'm going to go to you quickly, and then we'll go to Tanya, and then we will get pretty close to, I think, wrapping up. But Mike, I do want to make sure you got time to go through the rest of your questions.
Hey, Mike, question for you on setting up the bid. It's 51% of a block's assessed value ownership, right? So it's not 50%, 51% of a block, the linear square frontage on a block. It's the value of a property. So if one property is worth $10 million and everything else is $1 million, we're looking at really we need, well, depending on the balance of the $1 million homes or $1 million properties. Again, the membership to set up the bid requires 51% of a block's assessed value ownership, right? Is that?
It requires two things, and it's not block by block. It's really within the entire boundary. But yeah, you have to have a majority of the assessed value and at least 25% of all owners. As I think as you would look at it, I mean, but I'm not a lawyer, but I think it's like the tax parcels.
Yeah. So, and then 25% of the ownership on top of that. So those two dual perspectives. Okay, thank you. And then secondly,
yeah, so for instance, if you had, what if your bid was like $100 million building and 10 $1 million, row houses, you would need, if you got the apartment building, that's your 50% assessed value, but you would need to at least get, 25% of those 11. So it's both, and it's trying to balance such that it's not just all the behemoths, but still reflective of everyone in that community.
Thank you for that. And then secondly, real quick, board membership. So the authorizing legislation, the bid legislation only requires that a board be majority of business owners. And then it says, and then including others, and it lists resident. So would it be, in your perspective, that the bylaws or the articles of incorporation could include one or two or three explicit residential positions on the board?
No, absolutely. We have like kind of template documents that have been used in previous bid efforts, but it's certainly individualized to the neighborhood and to the community. So for example, like I talked a little bit about this, but the board would probably consist of something like 17 to 23 members, about at least 50% of whom would represent property owner interests. But you also have the ability to add arts and other community members, nonprofits who are active in the neighborhood, people like Howard University who have been involved in our efforts to advance this, kind of given their investment in the neighborhood and central importance to it. So yeah, no, the board membership can be extremely diverse and would not at all just be the major landowners. It would be reflective of the community, and we have not gotten to the point of drafting the specifics of this legislation, but that would be the intent, that indeed those kind of 17 to 23 reflect a broad swath of the community.
And just to close, you would then could entertain explicit resident owners or residents, whether owners or renters. You could explicit, and you would entertain that. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Because again, like, we understand how we have to draw it to be successful and where the money is, but certainly the neighborhood interacts with everyone around it. That's our experience as apartment owners in various neighborhoods in DC. And that has been our experience. Well, Michael McCarthy's experience more specifically, given his roles on the DuPont bid and the downtown bid. But absolutely, it needs to be representative of everyone. Like the arts, we know we've been working with the folks at IMP. They've been great to work with. So again, we want the board to be reflective of all the different constituencies in the community, of which there are many. So yeah, you don't necessarily have to be a property owner, and you don't necessarily need to be like, say, a row home owner. There will be a diverse representation on the board.
Tanya.
Yes, I wanted to know, how does the bid react to the economic ups and downs of the district? So does what am I trying to say? I'm trying to get at, do you have those pressures? So for example, if, businesses are closing, the DC government doesn't have any money because of, let's say this $1 billion uh cut, essentially, that, well, it's not really a cut because it's our own money, but what the Congress is proposing or has proposed without giving DC a out from the federal cuts, how would that impact us? Would the bid still be able to function? DC would not be able to function if they don't, if the House doesn't pass the Senate bill, but would the bid still be able to
Fair.
function?
Okay. No, absolutely. And so I guess I would address this in a couple of points. Certainly, well, I would say, first of all, the biggest threat right now in terms of like assessed value in DC is right now in the office market. And this is not a heavy office market bid. So though, but residential values are certainly not immune. We certainly feel that. And we certainly understand that it's a big ask of business owners and property owners who are already under an immense amount of pressure from inflation, from declining revenues and changing patterns of going out. We certainly feel that on our own apartment income statements in terms of, the pressures on both revenue and expense. So it's a huge ask from us, and we know that. And that's why we want to come out and talk to people about what we can provide and make sure that that value proposition is there. So certainly not immune to economic downturns. It is based on assessed value. So if your assessed value goes down, the collections of the bid will go down. And I think from the board of directors and the executive committee, it just needs to be prudent in terms of how they manage funds and commit those funds such that there's still a cushion. I know, talking to Michael McCarthy, they're dealing with this right now at the bid. For instance, like the GSA has kind of pilot agreements, payment in lieu of taxes. While they would be exempt, they do contribute to the bid. And right now, they're planning on not getting that money. It may not be legal, it may not be right, but they're saying, well, that money is not coming next year. So how do we have to pivot? So, and we manage this in our own real estate projects and our own development projects. So you have to be prudent with how you structure your money. You cannot overcommit, and you make sure you can deliver what you say you are. But yeah, you have to be very thoughtful for that, because no one is immune from an economic downturn.
Right. And this is a key question, I think, because the reality of the situation is that this requires funding. And I think DC already struggles with that a little bit, because we wouldn't be having this conversation if our existing services could be handled. And so if DC does not have any money, whether or not it's fault or not, then I don't know how they can fund anime. I mean, that's not going to be on the priority if they're cutting teachers and other public safety entities. So I'm trying to figure out what can still go on in the worst case scenario. What can still function out of these two entities if worse comes to worse.
I'm not able to speak to the NMA. That would be more of a David Menny question. But from the bid's perspective, it's the property owners who are funding this. We're not relying on district money. Like, if a council member can come up with a safe corridors grant, we would be all over it, and we would use that money to the best of our ability to improve the corridor. But right now, the services in our business plan are 100% reliant on the property owner taxes. And we realize that's a huge ask right now. So we don't come with this lightly. But yeah, from the standpoint of our plan, and it's the 1.25 million, that's what we think we can get right now, before kind of other pilots or funding sources. And that's the 2 to 3 full-time employees and the 9 contract employees. We know that we can do that within the currently assessed values. So we're not reliant on city money for this, but if we are able to be successful in establishing our operation, we would look for all sources able to contribute.
Thanks for that clarification, because I think city money is going to be scarce. Thank you.
And Tanya, the balancing act there, and Karen, I see your hand up. You're next. Is we've got a lot of restaurants on U Street that are struggling, right? And I know that they may not own the building and they may not be the person paying the bid tax, but I think, to Michael's point, when the economy softens or when there are kind of revenue shortfalls, it can hit everywhere. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many folks are paying attention to keeping U Street and North Shaw vibrant.
No, I mean, I hear those. Yeah, no, we absolutely understand those concerns. We have retail tenants in our portfolio throughout the building. throughout our portfolio. And yeah, no, it's a difficult time for a lot of businesses right now. But our belief is that this kind of placemaking entity can improve the quality of life in the corridor, that make it more attractive to both people who want to go out and spend their dollars to socialize, to the business owners who want to operate their business and contribute to the livelihood of the neighborhood. We think one of the best things that we can do is get this place back on the track that it was, a number of years ago. And I remember waiting in line 45 minutes in my 20s to go into a Derek Brown bar for the privilege of buying a $15 cocktail. And, that doesn't exist right now. And there's a myriad reasons for that. But, there's a vibrancy to this corridor that, we believe that we can help bring back. And it certainly takes some upfront money, which is, again, a big ask of us. But we've seen this model work in other commercial corridors, and we'd like to try our efforts here.
Thanks, Tanya. Thanks, Mike. Karen, probably one of our last questions. Mike, you'll have the closing, anything else you want to add, and then we'll wind down. Karen, question.
Great. Mike, so as Tanya mentioned, of course, with this economic crisis that we just came out of, which was COVID, and we're dealing with a lot of vacant buildings within this new corridor that we're talking about tonight. And you won't have anyone with leases in those places, and the public safety is still a huge issue. I would like to know exactly. I didn't hear about any of your public safety measures in your economic plan that you presented tonight. Exactly how much will that cost you for public safety ambassadors to have people walking through to help with the safety issues? And then also, how will you address the empty buildings and potentially people who are going to add more to our vacant buildings, especially with this economic turn that we have in the city?
Sure, no, great question. So and again, we're still dealing in very hypothetical budgets here, but in terms of thinking through how that 1.2 million could be allocated, you would probably be looking at something like 550,000 that goes into things like security consultancy, place management and enhancement, and branding. So for instance, one thing that we talked about with Commander Pulliam when we met with him last week would be, helping in like investing in security cameras that can then be consistent across the corridor, linked into some of the new operations centers that the city is doing. That's one particular tool. Obviously, getting more people on the street through, kind of various clean teams, can help make it a less hospitable place to perhaps do something illegal. I know at our building at 7th and T, we're significantly investing in our own security around the building above and beyond what we are doing in other neighborhoods to try and, make sure our perimeter is safe, but kind of coordinating those efforts. In terms of vacant storefronts and small business, I think we have to work very closely with Main Streets, and it's an organization that's focused on small business. But are there things that we can do on the capital investment side that can help with, branding and kind of storefront advertising, kind of small repairs, different things. So with the ability to invest in capital, CapEx, as opposed to just operating expense, is certainly a way that we can complement and work with the Main Streets. And certainly things like creating standard wayfinding signage and branding, because like Shaw and U Street have such a strong brand. Those are certainly some things that we can do. You have a bullhorn in the sense that a bully pulpit for this executive director and other folks to help drive branding and other things, drive things like the farmers market. I think I saw a question about that, and that's certainly something that they do elsewhere to generate good activity. Cleaning up tree boxes. Again, you're just trying to show that someone is investing and cares, and to try to help approve these things. A bid is probably not a panacea, but you need these efforts and someone cheerleading. And I think, and while a bid is not going to lobby, it's going to become that person who can help be a focal point for the city agencies and kind of bang on those doors and saying, hey, we need this, you're ignoring this, kind of like, it sounds like I was sorry I was not able to make the nightlife meeting earlier today, got a little crazy at work, but it sounds like there was a lot of good feedback there and a lot of, focus on the attention that the neighborhood needs. So again, you're trying to be that person who's, demanding accountability from the city agencies, people not showing up to meetings, not having been to the last one and not bringing their deliverables. You're trying to demand that accountability from the city and kind of be that bully pulpit and bullhorn for the neighborhood and get the attention and services that it needs. So I kind of meandered through some points there. It's certainly a big question, but those kind of enhancements are certainly the initial focus of the bid at its outset.
Great. All right. And David made a comment that his office, council member's office, is working with the chairman on vacant and blighted properties from another angle. So I know there's a lot of attention.
Things like, Department of Buildings and ABCA, making sure that the rules that we have are enforced and that, the folks who do own properties are being good actors within the community is certainly important. And I know it's 8:30 and everyone's probably tired and or hungry. But just really quickly, too, from a timeline standpoint, we've heard feedback. We know that help is needed now. It was needed yesterday or last week even. So in terms of our timeline, it's ambitious, but there is a timeline for this to happen in 2025. I mean, we need to get on our horse here. But there is, it's a process that's been done before. We have consultants who have worked on these processes before. Everything needs to be tailored to the needs of this specific community, but we're not starting from ground zero. We've got the framework of the bid corporation and other legal documents and bylaws. Again, they need work, they need to be, and then the legislation needs to be drafted. But again, we have folks who have experience with these organizations who have done them before and who are actively participating in them across the city. So there's certainly a chance to get this up by 4Q 25. At the outset, the other target would be March of 25 in about a year, because right now we have to hustle to get there in time for the 9/30 assessments, the second half tax year 25 payment, because you can get it stood up, but if you don't have your revenue coming in, it's, you can't do much. So that's really the time frame that we're working in. And even before, we get this thing stood up, if we can get it stood up, is, using, our position in the community and our relationships within the city to try and help drive small improvements if we can before then. Because again, we're property owners. Our property management team is on the ground every day in Shaw. The building is opening this month. We're investing in other places in the neighborhood. So again, we understand the help that's needed and how quickly it is. And so well, anyway, so thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you this evening. I appreciate all the thoughtful feedback, and my door's always open if you have questions or want to follow up with me after this. We'd certainly love to hear your feedback and welcome it.
Great. Mike, thanks for the thoughtful comments. Thank you for all the time and energy your team put into that. Committee members, I think any other final questions? Otherwise, I'm going to wrap this up. We have two new business agenda items, neither of which are pressing, so I'm going to postpone those to our next meeting. But Mike, thank you for the time. Frank, do you have one more question?
Just a process question. So are we sort of done with NMA and bid, or we're still going forward?
Yep. So let's do this, right? Obviously, we've got there are options that are being put on the table. Our specific next step, we have collected enough information that we will be putting together a draft communication to Councilmember Nadeau's office that will articulate the questions that have been raised by this community. That will also request perhaps some kind of specific things that we would like to see them do, either in terms of some maybe minor amendments to the bill as submitted, or some requests for kind of additional clarity or specificity around scope of services or funding, et cetera. So we'll be crafting something. My goal is to have this committee vote on something formal at our next meeting, and then the commission would be voting on that formal at the beginning of May, which would be our next committee meeting, or sorry, next full commission meeting. So that's our next step there. The bid discussions are running in parallel, right? So a bid has not been officially formed, but a lot of exploration and a lot of thought has been going on. And so this has been really an educational discussion and an opportunity for us to meet Mike and his team, learn from Mike and his team. A lot of the business owners have been emailing me and perhaps others saying, "Hey, we'd like to learn more about this." So that's one of the big reasons that that we've asked questions of Mike, and we appreciate him answering them. So we've got a couple of next steps, right? And the first and foremost next step is to provide specific feedback on the NMA, because that request was made of the commission and made of this committee. We'll be doing that. We've got at some point, Mike and his team may be coming back and asking for specific feedback on a bid proposal. Right at this point, it's been more kind of conceptual, but at some point they may come back and say, "Hey, commission and business leaders and committee, would like to get your feedback on something that we're putting together," which could include things like the geography and the services and things like that. So we would, of course, be very happy to participate in those conversations if asked. And then, the Councilmember Pinto's piece today, a whole other thing that I suspect there's going to be conversations coming on, and I'm not going to surmise anything on this call in terms of next steps there. Okay.
Very good.
Great. All right. So with old business concluded, with a postponement of the two new business items, any further questions or announcements from the committee, or questions from? We've got a question from Arlene. Arlene, I'm gonna just give you the click on the button to talk. Go ahead.
Okay, I just have a quick question. If you could give us a brief update on the 1617 U Street RFP, where that stands, where the community engagement stands on that.
Super good question, Arlene. And I know we talked about it when you were thoughtful enough to invite me over on a Saturday to the 3rd District meeting. So why don't we do this? I will reach out to DemPed. My understanding is that they have not been moving fast. Part of why they are describing as not moving fast as some of the economic and development conditions that Mike had hinted at. Capital is incredibly expensive. The district economy is a bit uncertain, or maybe less certain than it has been in a long time. And so they are not feeling like there are people who are racing to kind of put bids in on that property. That said, that is just kind of a very kind of scratch the surface update. Let me commit to getting some updates from them. Let me also commit to talking with them about a more formal and ongoing community engagement process.
Yeah, because I'd like to, I don't want the community to be left out, or us to miss the opportunity, because I think lots of times, the residents don't really know all the details and dates, and I think we miss out on opportunities to engage. So I want to make sure that we really are up on the schedule and timeline for that.
Yep. Let me kind of commit to next steps. I'll email you, Arlene, because I got
Okay.
your information, and then we'll make that an agenda item for next month.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep, no worries. David Menny.
Hey, thanks, Arlene, for the question. I'll just add to what the commissioner said real quick. I suspect what you will hear from DemPed, because it's what we've heard from them, is that the zoning order that needs to be fully approved by this, drafted first of all, and then approved by the zoning commission, essentially outlining the vote that they made to approve, is still in progress. I think from DemPed's standpoint, and I think understandably, you're not going to get a lot of bids on something that still is uncertain from an entitlement standpoint. So I think that is part of the process that needs to proceed right now.
Okay, great, thanks. And I may have messed up Arlene's.
Yeah, no, I
there she
did
is.
some. I just wanted to understand the community engagement happens before the RFP goes out, and you start receiving, bids from the development companies, or is that after, once you have all of these bids, and we're just sort of are looking at what they're proposing? I guess I don't understand, when does that community engagement actually happen?
I think that's an appropriate discussion to have once the zoning commission's finished its process.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's what we just Arlene, just to say what we did in previous cases. David is absolutely correct. We waited until the zoning process was finished. We waited until the RFP had been issued by the city. We then held a series of meetings, for example, on the Reach Center, looking at the what came in on the RFP before before the ANC said this is the one that we like.
Okay, so we're actually choosing what we like rather than giving input as to what we would want in those proposals. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for
Frank?
the clarification.
Yeah, sorry, Arlene, to close the loop on that, we will put it on the agenda. We will talk with DemPed about engagement. I would like to very much see the community involved earlier in the process, and that we have clarity in terms of what the plan is. Someone had mentioned in a very offhand way at a meeting I was at that, well, gosh, since the police department is going to completely go away after all of this. I don't think that's the case, but I think it's better for us all to start understanding what the plan is, so that we're not, getting nervous about things that are rumors, and to be able to influence an outcome that is going to be a good outcome for the community.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Frank.
Yes, playing into the question by Arlene and the discussion, I think it's an important question. We have always just been, here you are, here you go. This is what we think. You're to refine this after we go out for with the RFP. And the question is, does this ANC have any authority, duty, diligence to partake in that RFP before it goes out? And I think that's a perennial question that's not raised enough and worthy of discussion and consideration.
Frank, why don't we do this? If you don't mind just putting a little bit of thought into a proposal in terms of kind of where you'd think we'd want to have engagement, kind of the degree to which and the timing. Let's kind of come back together again and let's come together again and see what path makes the most sense and engage DemPed in that discussion.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Thank you, everybody. We have a few kind of few folks with some stamina, so thank you for staying so late. Thank you all again. We are adjourning our meeting at 8:46 p.m. And thank you to all for your thoughtfulness and your participation. Have a good night and enjoy your weekends.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you for a good meeting.
Thanks, Arlene.